Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. A few years ago, Xi Jinping ordered the Chinese military to have the capability to take Taiwan by 2027. The US believes a threat to Taiwan is possible this decade. Yet despite the many impact assessments on such a contingency, estimating trillions of US dollars in damage to the global economy, how ready is the world for what could be the worst global shock in history? A global alliance of lawmakers wants to change all that. They say global instability is a problem for the whole world, but we cannot prevent what we cannot see. They've launched a new campaign called Operation MIST to lobby their governments to measure the impact of such a crisis. Joining us to discuss this are Chien-Huei, Academia Sinica Institute of European and American Studies Research Fellow, and Ronan Fu, Academia Sinica Institute of Political Science Assistant Research Fellow. And from Prague, Pavel Fisher, Czech Senator and Chair of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Security Committee and former Ambassador to France. A very warm welcome to the show today. The Interparliamentary Alliance on China has more than 260 backbencher members in 35 countries or legislations, including the European Parliament. They include 22 in Europe, 4 in the Americas, 5 in the Indo-Pacific and 2 in Africa. Operation MIST has a simple message of a global problem and global responsibility. Take a look.
Last year, President Macron spoke about Taiwan. He said, Europe should not be caught in conflicts that are not ours.
He was right to clarify his comments later, emphasizing opposition to Beijing's threats.
Because securing stability across the Taiwan Strait is all of our responsibility.
And the instability is a problem for the whole world.
A blockade of the Taiwan Strait could cost the global economy $10 trillion or even more.
And that's more than the economic slowdown caused by the COVID-19.
5 times more than Putin's illegal war in Ukraine.
This is unthinkable. It's something we can't allow.
And it is a very real risk.
More must be done to prevent this.
Not solely to protect the people of Taiwan and their right to self-determination,
but for the people of every one of our countries who will all be deeply affected.
But we cannot prevent what we cannot see.
That's why we're launching Operation MIST.
Asking governments to measure the impact of a shock in the Taiwan Strait and prepare for it.
To ensure that nobody can say they didn't know. To protect our interests.
And to ensure the people of Taiwan receive the support they deserve.
Now, to find out more about the campaign, we're going to go direct to Prague and IPAC co-chair Senator Pavel Fisher of Czechia. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us today. Now, IPAC starts its campaign video with French President Emmanuel Macron, and in April 2023, we know he made a controversial comment following a visit to Beijing about Taiwan. He said, I quote, "Do we Europeans have an interest in speeding up on the subject of Taiwan? No. Europe should not be caught in conflicts that are not its own." So I want to ask you, why start with that?
It was kind of wake-up call for each of us, because this was out of the traditions of French democracy and fight for freedoms. We know that there is an indivisibility of freedoms, that in the text of UN Charter, you will find even the right self-determination of people. So we have to respect what citizens of Taiwan would like for their own future.
So what I gather from that is that IPAC is almost saying that you don't hold the same views as the French president. Tell me, what do you see is lacking or missing in governments around the world, their attitudes to a possible Chinese attack on Taiwan, that you hope that this campaign, Operation MIST, to measure the impact of a shock on Taiwan in Taiwan Strait, that this campaign will fill?
Governments should be prepared for it. anticipate, have proper analysis, and do steps in order to deter China to continue. For instance, if we engage on the level of parliaments with a legislative yuan, exactly what deters Beijing, because they see that friends, partners, and channels for dialogue. After the elections, presidential and legislative elections in Taiwan, the global attention is focused somewhere else. And I think that we shouldn't forget that the situation of this part of the world has very important impact also on us. And this is why we should think globally and invite our governments to act.
Okay, and bearing that in mind, what would you expect could be achieved with this campaign?
I think that we have to connect the dots. If we see Russia blocking the UN Security Council as far as the Russian aggression against Ukraine is concerned, Russia is not alone. She is backed by China. I think that if such a global alliance is here, we should do our utmost. And we would like that this campaign helps us also to focus more on the future of Taiwan and on the stability of the Taiwan Strait, which is of importance to each of us.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Senator Fisher, for joining us via video link today from Prague. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Professor Wu, so something that Senator Fisher said was, you know, the campaign's goal is to help governments join the dots. What do you make of that?
Not all countries, especially government officials, they are aware of the danger of China's potential attack over Taiwan. And they are not aware of the cost, not only in terms of human days, human lives, but also in terms of the economic cost of their countries will suffer from. So in this campaign, I think this is the first step to awaken the officials and for them to take a concrete plan to prepare.
Okay, and Ronan, let's talk about the China threat. So we know that Xi Jinping has asked his military to have the capability to take Taiwan, but some analysts say that, you know, this is what militaries do. They set goals to reach a capability. It doesn't mean that there's any intent in there. So what do we know about the China threat, and is it increasing?
Yeah, it is indeed increasing, and the threat China poses to Taiwan is multidimensional, so including the increased military maneuvers, and that basically is aimed at intimidating Taiwan into, you know, surrendering and try to stop asserting our, you know, sovereign claims. And the aggressive actions they take include, you know, incursion into Taiwan's AIDZ, and some naval operations in the surrounding waters. And increasingly, you can see a lot of, you know, gray zone conflict happen between China and Taiwan, let alone, you know, the informational tactics they use against Taiwan. These are all different, you know, attacks coming from different dimensions. So that's the reason why I call it like a multidimensional threat.
Okay, but what do we know about any intent?
Yeah, so the intent, I think, if you think of intent as, do they consider taking back Taiwan as their national interest? I think if you define it as intent, that intent will never change. In terms of removing Taiwan of their national interest calculation, that's not impossible. That's not possible.
Okay, all right. In their campaign, AIPAC mentions this figure. It's the $10 trillion figure that Bloomberg forecasts would cost local and global economies should China start a war over Taiwan and involve the US at 10% of GDP. It's double that of the global financial crisis and the pandemic. Now, I asked international relations and East Asian expert Stephen Nagy why that figure was so high. Take a look.
It's really important for us to understand where Taiwan fits within the region's economy and the global economy. I sometimes call it a capstone because it connects all the economies through supply chains, but also Taiwan's geographic position along the sea lines of communication that vary about $5.5 trillion of trade. Most estimates suggest that a Taiwan crisis or friction across the Taiwan Straits or conflict could result in at least 7.7 trillion to 10 trillion US dollars of damage. So from 5 to 7% of global GDP.
So when we say that Taiwan has an integral position within these global supply chains, what do we actually mean?
Well, like I said, there's a technological side, and I think we know this story. The Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company produces those top-tier semiconductor chips that goes into our phones, into our iPads, into our jet fighters. So if we had a crisis across the Taiwan Strait, there would be a bottleneck that would stop the delivery of those sophisticated semiconductors around the world. And this would really impact our communication, our financial services, and of course, how we communicate. At the lower level, I think Taiwan also plays an important role in supply chains for textiles and other smaller products. But also, I think we should be aware of Taiwan's position in terms of investment in the broader region. The third largest FDI investor in Southeast Asia, for example, is Taiwan. So a crisis across the Taiwan Strait would impact not only the region's economy or the economies between Taiwan and China, but it would have downstream effects on Southeast Asian countries, as well as even India, where India is a huge recipient of Taiwanese FDI.
Now, IPAC in their campaign will be calling on their particular governments to actually carry out impact assessments. What do we know about the vast bulk of the impact assessments that have been carried out so far? And mostly, it seems to be think tanks that have carried out these impact assessments. What do you think would be the difference if it was governments that carried this out?
I think importantly, we're going to have a more country-specific focus of looking at how, for example, Canada, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Australia would be affected differently by a crisis. And their economies are slightly positioned differently in the global economy. They have different dependencies in terms of semiconductors and other products. And I think that we need to not only make an assessment of how we'd be impacted in a kinetic conflict across the Taiwan Straits, but I think that we need to make assessments of how we can shift or help shift our production or manufacturing centers that rely on the semiconductors and other products that come from Taiwan. But I think we also need to be thinking about how we can help Taiwan maintain its position within the global economy, enhance its deterrence, and enhance, again, its role as a global public good. And I can't tell you how important that is. We've seen a real shift in how we talk about Taiwan. We no longer talk about Taiwan as just a bilateral relationship, but we talk about it within the context of the G7. The Hiroshima G7 summit talked specifically about Taiwan. The NATO Asia-Pacific 4 statements, again, talking about Taiwan. Even the Camp David principles that were signed in August 2022 between the United States, Japan, and South Korea also spoke about Taiwan. Again, this internationalization of Taiwan as a global public good is going to be incredibly important in terms of preserving peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait.
Ronan, let me come to you off the back of that interview. So we heard Stephen Nagy's assessment there. Why is it that a Chinese attack on Taiwan would cost double that of the pandemic and also the global financial crisis?
Yeah, so we mainly talk about the global trade disruptions here. And I want to add on that, saying that basically we didn't actually include the possible increase of military expenditures. And if you add that on top of the 10 trillion, it's way beyond 10 trillion. And going back to the 10 trillion, this figure, so basically for each year, for example in 2022, TSMC itself accounted for the market value at 492 billion, right? So it's just a company, right? So think about the connectedness that TSMC has with all other, industries and all other countries. So 10 trillion basically can still be underestimated. So number one, TSMC, or the importance of the semiconductor. Number two, the Taiwan Strait serves as a very important trade route in the entire world. So basically, according to various different calculations, it accounted for 2% to 5% of the global trade GDP via this route.
Exactly, and I think Stephen mentioned $5.5 trillion worth is through those shipping lanes. So just to summarize, it's the semiconductors, the chips, it's the shipping lanes, it's the individual economies of China, Taiwan and the United States, and also all the interconnected linkages of those economies to other economies and the global economy as a whole. Okay, so we could see, as maybe you're predicting, that figure go up. Now, IPAC says they are launching Operation MIST to measure the impact of a shock in the Taiwan Strait, asking their governments to carry out impact assessments to ensure that nobody can say they didn't know. So, Professor Wu, let me come to you. What do you expect to be the implications of these lawmakers asking their governments to actually do country-specific assessments?
From the legislative branch, it in fact a result from to the government plan. Then I think in most of West countries, they would have some idea about how to prevent such a Taiwan contingency in the very beginning, if they realize the cost. I think in
so you're saying if they actually go through the figures and they realize the cost, it will make them want to prevent it even more?
Yes. I think this is a very important one because in the past few months, a lot of think tanks they make their estimation for how much would be cost for if there's Taiwan contingency. I would say the U.S. has a more clear picture on this, but European countries, so far, I would say. European countries in Brussels, they think Taiwan is far away from them. So the attention for European countries more on Ukraine instead of Taiwan Strait. So this is a wake-up call for European countries in particular.
Yeah, interesting the difference between the backbenchers, which is like the members of IPAC, and the ones who are actually in the administrations, in the governments, in terms of what you said about many governments think of Taiwan as being just simply too far away. Ronan, but could this also have unwanted or unintended consequences for Taiwan? We heard Stephen Nagy talk about, looking into a shift of supply chains away from Taiwan.
Yeah, so it's really a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, by increasing people's awareness of the importance of Taiwan, centering at the strategic calculation between China and the United States. So on the one hand, they are going to do everything they can to help Taiwan out. But for the sake of national interest, you are going to see some contingency plans being panned out by the European countries. And the plan being, they have to de-risk. They have to take their national interest into consideration. So Taiwan needs to figure out that they should always put Taiwan into the calculation or the equation, and then Taiwan can help them to enhance the joint effort. So Taiwan has to establish our value.
Okay, Professor, a very good point there. Taiwan needs to have agency. It needs to be consulted.
So okay, I have been talking about this for a few times. Nothing about us without us. Yeah, this is the only.
I've heard that in relation to Ukraine.
Yeah, the point here is we do agree there's some risk. So there's some necessity for diversification. And then the second question is where to? So when we decide diversification, we can think about it from two levels. One is state level, how to prevent the economic of Taiwan being hollowed out. And the second is the firm level, where the TSMC can make a profit in diversification. So the first
because for example, there are some problems in the US or issues that they're working through in terms of much higher labor costs.
Yeah, so from the perspective of TSMC, the firm level, so the priority is our market labor cost and subsidy, and especially sufficient supply of skilled laborers. And thinking about that, the Japanese investment would be a good one. The second one would be Dresden, because there's a lot of automobile in Germany, and in Japan there's also the materials, the upstream materials of semiconductor industries. So it makes sense to some degree in terms of in Germany and in Japan. But from the state point, whether it is good or whether it contributes to the economic security of Taiwan when Taiwan keep all the semiconductor manufacturing capacity in this island. I personally don't think it's a good idea if you keep all the manufacturing capacity here.
Okay, so you talked about there's the aspect of hollowing out Taiwan's economy, which we would not want to happen in the next decade, because countries are preparing for a possible attack by China. And you've also hinted, and I might bring this over to Ronan, hinted about this, as you said, a double-edged sword. Is the best way to protect Taiwan? Is that the best way to protect other countries? So this is what we're hinting at, isn't it? I mean, we have long talked about the Silicon Shield, which essentially protects Taiwan because it is the hub, because it is the only place where all the high-end chips are made. So nobody should want to damage that, to destroy that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one way going forward for Taiwan is to demonstrate that you should take into, for example, TSMC into the diversification plan. So one way to diversify is, for example, to outsource to Intel, try to create some alternatives, or try to outsource to Samsung. So there are a variety of different ways of de-risking, and you have to put TSMC under the center, because they have the edge.
Right, okay. No doubt something that will have to be researched and discussed in a lot more detail. Now, in other news, the European Parliament recently approved 2 annual foreign policy and defence implementation reports with language supportive of Taiwan. They included this. Let's take a look at the exact words. Neither Taiwan nor China is subordinate to the other. Professor Wu, let me come to you. This is unprecedented. How significant is it?
My hunch is that this wording is actually borrowed from what President Chien-Huei said.
Really?
In a double 10 speech, maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, in 2021 something, Chien-Huei also said the same thing. But the point here is, what do we mean by not subordinate to each other? I mean, in terms of, as a lawyer, when you talk about not subordinated to each other, it actually doesn't give rise any legal or political meaning. The only thing is we can say they are different, they are separate. But it doesn't mention about the key element of sovereignty issues.
Let me just ask you, so when you say that, you are saying that Taiwan is not subordinate to China, you're saying that does not mean that
Taiwan is a sovereign state.
That Taiwan is a sovereign state. But then that would mean, logically, that China is not a sovereign state.
No, because the problem here is China is a sovereign state, which is well recognized. So when we read this sentence, we have to put into the social and political context. And China has not need to be recognized as a sovereign state because it is already recognized. But this sentence does not add too much in terms of Taiwan's sovereignty.
Okay.
That's what I'm going to say.
But I guess then you would say that what it is saying is that Taiwan is not part of China.
Yes. So then, if they change the sentence into they say Taiwan is not part of China, then it is really groundbreaking. But this is not the way they put it.
So you're saying it gives them some room to move. There's some grey areas. So Ronan, do you have any thoughts on what this means for the EU's One China policy?
Yeah, so I think that is, I agree with Chien-Huei that it is not, groundbreaking, but I do think that they subtly, challenge the conventional interpretation of the one China policy. Yeah, and I mean subtly. Yeah, because they can just, challenge this notion entirely, saying something that, Taiwan is a sovereign state, something like that. But they didn't mention that. So I say subtly challenge. And I have to say that this does not equate to the formal abandonment of the one China policy. But they know that they can play with some, wording, some different syntax, so that they can show, willingness to support Taiwan, perhaps via more informal or, diplomatic, and not at a very high, official level interaction.
Okay, right. We're going to have to wrap it up there. Professor Wu Chien-Huei and Ronan Fu, thank you so much for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.